So when it comes to all the lies that the left feels should be at the basis of your personality and your self-affirmation, there's this quote from Alexandra Occasional Cortex that in some way should become the motto of dishonest leftist cultures, cut 26.
I think that there's a lot of people more concerned about being precisely, factually, and semantically correct than about being morally right.
Yeah, so you're morally right. The facts don't matter. But can you even be morally right? Can you be morally right if you don't know the facts? How can you be morally right if you don't know the facts? You know, there's a thing in the law called the McNaughton Rule. The McNaughton Rule is based on a guy named Daniel McNaughton, and he tried to assassinate the prime minister, killed another guy instead by accident, and he was ruled insane because he thought the prime minister was basically plotting to take his life, which was just deluded. And the idea was that if you didn't know reality, you couldn't know right from wrong, and therefore you were insane, right? If you don't know morality, if you don't know reality, if you don't know the facts, you can't know right from wrong. You can't know what you should be doing if you don't know what reality is. So on Backstage the other day, I was talking about the rise of mental illness. Candace Owens said that transgenderism was a religion, and I said it's really not. It's a mental illness. It is a mental illness of people who do not know what is going on right from wrong, and that's not true of all of them. It's not true of the doctors. I got to say, I just have to give a shout out to Matt Walsh. He's been trending on Twitter for like 3 weeks or something. He's doing this God's work in calling out this hospital here, the Vanderbilt Hospital in Nashville, and he found all these videos online where they were telling people we have to do more of these transition surgeries on young people as young as 16, I believe, was the youngest they found here, but this younger other places. And he found these speeches that they were giving to doctors about how much money you could make. Here's Dr. Shane Taylor explaining, this was just online, he found them, how much money you could make doing transgender surgery. It's cut 17.
These surgeries make a lot of money. So female to male chest reconstruction can bring in $40,000. A patient just on routine hormone treatment, who I'm only seeing a few times a year, can bring in several $1,000s. That requires a lot of visits and labs. It actually makes money for the hospital. And then the female to male bottom surgeries, these are huge money makers. Again, I think this has to be an underestimate that they're quoting around $20,000 for a phalloplasty. There's been different things that I've read that said it could be up to $100,000. Dr. Winokur, who's our surgeon, says that there's entire clinics where the entire clinic is supported just by their phalloplasties, and that is like a fraction of the surgeries that they're doing.
So what she's saying essentially is you're going to make a lot of money because this is going to make people so miserable and so sick that they're going to have to keep coming back for more treatment. So you're going to make a bundle. So, you know, when Matt called this out, these people took down their entire website, which shows they know what they're doing. They know they're doing wrong, or they wouldn't be hiding. But the children who are going in there, who have been taught that they can become happy by turning their body into a costume of the opposite sex, or whatever they're being told, they are the ones who are suffering from a kind of mental illness because it's induced mental illness because they have been told something that isn't true. And that is why I'm constantly hammering back and saying we have to have the truth in order to really feel who we are, know who we are, and to know reality and to know morality. And what the left does by personalizing history and then lying about history is they make it essential to your well-being to live in a lie. They essentially drive you insane. This thing about being proud or ashamed of racial history is real. It is real. I've talked about this before, that like when Sandy Koufax, a Jewish pitcher, was the great ace pitcher in my childhood, I was proud of that. I had nothing to do with that. I didn't have that skill. It wasn't me doing it, but you can't help it. It's just a natural human thing. And the Italians sit around, we wrote opera and these beautiful paintings, and the British, created great legal system in their literature. The Jews gave us our religion. But these things that happen to people of the same race, also come back to haunt us. The Jews had a big problem with this. It was still going on when I was a little kid after the Holocaust. Why didn't they resist? Why did they go to their deaths like sheep? Why did the Jews assist the Nazis, which they often did, thinking that maybe they could make things better? And some of them were just corrupt because every people has corrupt people as well. There were some Jews who were shipped from their slums, their ghettos, to the gas chambers and rarely saw a German at all because the Jewish system had been put into place doing this. And they felt shame about this, terrible shame. And it's one of the reasons I always disliked Schindler's List, because I feel it's a dishonest view of the Holocaust seen from seen from a perspective of a charitable act. And there were so few of those in the Holocaust. And Africa has this problem. Africa has been dysfunctional. It's not dysfunctional because of the British or the colonizers. It was dysfunctional from the start. It was dysfunctional when they got there. It was a slave state when they got there. If you read the journals of explorers like Mungo, you'll just see how crime-ridden it was, not just from the Africans, but from Muslim colonizers who had come in, who were greater slavers than the Europeans, certainly, and who castrated their slaves so that they didn't have descendants, which at least we can say the Americans didn't do as a small comfort, but still. But it has been this way for a long time. Now, in prehistory, Africa probably contributed more to human advancement than any other place. But again, this isn't a racial thing. Thomas Sowell writes about this. He writes about it brilliantly, where he talks about the fact that there are no navigable rivers in Africa, the fact that there are no draft animals, so it's harder to build a civilization. The weather probably had a lot to do with it. Cold countries have a tendency to become more higher civilizations because they have to defend themselves from the weather. Whether it has anything to do with race, I have no clue. All I know is that every time people get out of the places where they are oppressed or where the systems are dysfunctional, when they come to places like America, they rise. That's all I know. I think a lot of this is just culture. But and that's why I think it's so important to defend American culture and to keep American culture intact. And that's why this thing about immigration, we have no borders. We have no borders. Millions of people are pouring over our borders, and the Democrats sit there po-faced and say, what, are you a bigot? And what's really interesting about this is what drove me crazy about Ken Burns. I find his stuff just stultifying. His documentaries just stultifying. It's, he's so brilliant. He's so brilliant. Well, he's obviously a shallow pretender, because he goes on and he's talking about this thing that happened on Martha's Vineyard, where they just basically were called out for their virtue signaling, and they were humiliated. Now everybody's covering up for them, but they were obviously humiliated. And Burns goes on, and he's on CNN, and the host says something about, it's kind of like the Holocaust, isn't it? Because Burns has made a documentary in which he blames America for not taking in the Jews, basically saying this is why we must take in people from South America. If we don't do it, we're being just like the evil people of the Holocaust. And Burns basically agrees, and this is what he says about DeSantis's political game of shipping the illegals to the places where they said they would be welcome. This is cut 6.
It's basically saying that you can use a human life that is as valuable as yours or mine or Lynn's, and to put it in a position of becoming a political pawn in somebody's authoritarian game. This is coming straight out of the authoritarian playbook. This is what's so disturbing about DeSantis, is to use human beings, to weaponize human beings for a political purpose. It's like when somebody disagrees with him in Florida, like the Walt Disney Company, he punishes them.
Now, why this is so shallow? I mean, it's so. When I said he's so shallow as to be two-dimensional, it really is true. There's a very famous book called Eichmann in Jerusalem by the philosopher Hannah Arendt, and it's a problematical book because it turned out Eichmann was just pretending to be this kind of normal guy who got caught up in the machinery of Nazi Germany. In fact, he was a virulent anti-Semite. But she points out in this that when the Nazis tried to deport Jews to other countries, and the other countries didn't want them, the Nazis, who were eager to generalize, as Hannah Arendt would say, see, nobody likes the Jews. They're undesirables. That's why we had to kill them. Nobody liked them. Nobody liked the Jews. And they would say this in their trials as they were fighting for their lives. And Hannah Arendt said, it's not as though those tightly organized European nation states would have reacted any differently if any other group of foreigners had suddenly descended upon them in hordes, penniless, passportless, unable to speak the language of the country. In other words, People don't want unbridled immigration because it throws off the population of the country. We in America are incredibly generous by letting people in if they can then be assimilated into our culture, because our culture is why they're here. That's what they're coming for. We don't want to lose it. So to lie about this, to lie about why people reacted as they did to this mass migration of peoples during the wars is just so false. And it basically is saying you're a bad person if you say, well, this is a great country and we want to keep it a great country and we can let in a certain amount of immigrants, but after a while it becomes a problem. That's nuance. That's just simple moral truth. It has nothing to do with compassion. It's very compassionate to let in some immigrants, but it's not very compassionate to destroy the culture that they're coming to find. And of course, if you let people flood in, you can't just lift the people of America off and throw in a bunch of other people and say, oh, now be Americans. That's not the way it works. We have a history, a tradition, things that have built up over time that have made our ideas real, that make this country what it is. And it's not about race. Anytime you start talking about race, in my opinion, you start to sound like an idiot. And that's why the Nazis were so quick to generalize, oh, this is about race. And the Europeans were saying, no, we have these kind of tightly organized societies that cannot take in as many people as you're trying to dump off on us. The problem with this, and this was another point I only had a chance to make briefly during the backstage, but it's so important, is we're being accused of being fascist. I love the fact that they're accusing Ben of being an extremist. Ben is like an Eisenhower Republican, and they're, because they have become so extreme that they have to demonize the normal. And Ben is certainly a normal conservative guy. They have to demonize the normal to make themselves look normal, which they're not. They're incredibly extreme. You're butchering children. You're extreme. And I've made the point that fascism, which they call us fascist. Fascism is a reactionary philosophy. It is something that comes into play when the left has gone too far, almost every time. In the Spanish Civil War, they talk about Franco and the fascists, but Franco wasn't a fascist when he started. He became a fascist over time because he thought that's how he could gather people around him to fight the left. And so, if people are overreacting, if people are becoming angrier than is healthy for them, that is because they are been lied about and lied to so often. That, too, is a kind of madness and a kind of madness on the left. And when you have people suing Donald Trump and criminalizing everything he does, when you have people silencing anybody, the FBI agent who pointed out that they were just inventing all this white supremacy danger, he's been put, forcibly retired. When you have them demonizing everybody on the right, eventually the right is going to react. And yes, you will get fascism. And what you want, this is why what I keep saying is what you want is, listen, I can live with freedom-loving left-wingers. I can live with freedom-loving left-wingers, not the left-wingers who are in power today. And they're not just in power in the government. As I'm pointing out, they're in power in Hollywood. They're in power in the universities. They're in power throughout the culture. We let them take that power. We have to bear the burden of it, but we have to strike back. We have to build a culture of truth to fight back against them. It does no good to build a culture of right-wing lies to fight the left-wing lies. We have to build a culture of truth and compassion and reality in order to bring this country back to the freedom-loving country that it was and can be, I'm sure, again. If you want more great content, like and subscribe to the Andrew Klavan Podcast.